Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am surrounded by a lot of experience and greatness. I have a really great guest along with Dr. Ian Billinghurst. First, Dr. B, hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Yep. And then we're really pleased to be here with Professor Fred Provenza. Now, before we go into a quick little introduction, I will ask, Fred to give a quick intro. This man we're going to be talking about the connection of soil, plants, herbivores, and humans. Okay. So this is crazy good stuff. When we get into this, you guys are going to be, those of you who are feeding raw, those of you who are teaching raw food for animals, we're gonna really get into the work that this man has done his whole entire life has in a lot of ways paralleled what Dr. Billinghurst has done. So without any more further ado, we'll talk about Behave in his book, Nourishment. Dr. Provenza, welcome.
Thank you, Rob. It's wonderful to be here with you and Ian. Absolutely the case. And we've already been having a very wonderful conversation, I can say.
Yes. It was so this was one of these magical moments. Literally, the cameras turned on. We did not hit record. And I was just saying this, we were vibing really heavily, very quickly, and we've never met before. You and I had exchanged some text messages in order to coordinate this, and that's about it. So I think the audience is going to be really happy to feel this vibe in this whole show. So let's start with Dr. B. I know Dr. B is a big fan of your work. So Dr. B, I'm going to let you start with let's start with a foundational question. Oh, wait, you know what? Sorry, Fred, give us a quick bio on you. Tell the audience a little bit about your life's work and how people might know you.
Okay, Rob, I'll try to do quickly. For me, it started as a child, actually, with incredible interest in the natural world. If insects, fish, birds, mammals, anything that moved, I was interested in it. So I ended up going to school at Colorado State University in wildlife biology. At the same time, though, I started working on a ranch. I worked for 7 years on the ranch. And those two experiences had a profound influence on everything I've done. On the ranch, I was learning from the old rancher there, Henry DeLuca. What does it mean for animals to know the range? And when I look back over the research that we've done, for 45, 50 years, it all has to do with that question. What does it mean for an animal to know the range? And so we did much research, probably 300 papers that we've published. People may have read the book Nourishment, which was my attempt to put that, to kind of summarize it. I know people aren't going to read 300 publications, but I thought maybe if I could write a book and try to give the highlights of that sort of thing. So published Nourishment, worked with a friend and colleague in France, and we co-authored another book, The Art and Science of Shepherding, Tapping the Wisdom of French Herders. And then I've done lots of podcasts. So those are all ways you'd ask, how people might have come into some of the work that we've done, and those are all ways that people might be familiar with some of the work we've done.
Great, awesome. All right, Dr. B, I'm going to let you kick it off.
Well, as I was saying to Fred before we started recording, I am an absolute fan of his work. But I've only become knowing about Fred from 3 o'clock this morning when I woke up and had this urge to find out about this person we'd be talking to. And since that time, I've been absolutely blown away by the work that he has done and the brilliance of that work, and in uncovering much of from a totally different perspective from me, from a wonderful academic but very practical experience, the importance of food in an animal's life and working with the basic. Now, for me, I'm an evolutionary biologist, self-taught. I'm actually an agricultural scientist and a veterinary surgeon, but I realized early on that the thing that was important to health was to match the genome of the animal with the foods they're eating. And I think in many ways, this would reflect what you've done in your lifetime, Fred. So am I right in saying that in any way from your perspective?
Hey there, this is Rob Ryan. I just want to say how much we enjoy making this content for you here. And if you are enjoying it, would you like our video down below? And would you subscribe to our YouTube channel? It sure does help us get discovered by more people like you who need information like this. And also down below in our description, the top link is to our trial pack. We hope you'll order one for your dog so your dog can have fermented superfoods that give them nutrition like they can't find anywhere else. Hard to get nutrients that are easily absorbed. Thank you very much. Now back to the show.
Yes, absolutely, Ian. And I'm thinking too, when you're saying that, you've done a lot of work, as I would understand, with pets of one sort or another, and then trying to think evolutionarily, what were the diets of those animals? What were they eating? And so I'm with you 100% on that. And then so our work is built upon those kind of ideas, and then this whole notion of how, given a particular genome, a goat or a sheep or a cow, what diets are going to work best for them, and then the flexibility for those animals to learn. This whole, we focus so much on the ability of, well, to ask the question, because at that time, it's amazing. It was very genome based, that everything was in the genome. How do I explain that? So everything.
Can I just interrupt you there, Fred, for a moment? You were working from the point of view that the genome is fixed and not flexible. But now we know it's highly flexible, but that is part of the genome itself, that it is flexible. It's not this fixed entity. Would that be right?
That's absolutely the case. And when I think of the studies that were being published, I worked a lot in ecology with ecologists and evolutionary folks. And it was this view that the genome was fixed in that sense. So the animal, what's it doing? It's just like a machine out there. But what we were able to show over and over again is the flexibility, and the ability of the animals to learn. So you have this kind of elementary idea, one could say, where you have this genome, but then to realize there's this cultural inflection, and it's being inflected always as a function of where the animal's born and raised and the conditions under which that takes place. And that's what was just amazing. So we would look at form, function, and behavior, all three: anatomy, physiology, behavior. And we would show, if you rear an animal, for instance, I'm thinking of goats right now, if you rear them on really poor quality diet, what happens to the organ systems of their body? Well, they grow really big rumens. Why? Because they need a big vat to ferment that really poor quality food, right? If you rear them on a high quality diet, they have a little tiny rumen because they don't need. See, and that had all been viewed as something that was evolutionary fixed. And we were showing that other organ systems, the kidneys, if animals are reared on a high salt diet, for instance, saltbush in Western Australia, that everything from neurologically, morphologically, physiologically, the body was making changes. And we know now this whole field of epigenetics, right? That genes are being expressed as a function of these experiences. And so over and over and over and over again, we were simply asking those kind of questions once we got started on this path. And it's all related to what Henry DeLuca was saying. What's it mean for an animal to know the range? How does that work? And so, and I think one could think too of coyotes reared in different environments, and what do they learn to select? Places here in the US, they can be problem with depredation on fruits, right? Cantaloupes and things like that. Well, an animal's going to learn those things, right? It doesn't necessarily come outcome knowing those, and then it can be transferred from parents to offspring and so forth. So those are the kind of things that we were studying, and just it was learning. We were learning all the time. It's not like we knew any of this. We were just open to seeing where all of this would lead us, and just fascinated by the whole thing.
One of my theories, Fred, has been, and I have to point out that I'm also a student of scientific philosophy, particularly the work of Karl Popper, if you know him at all, where we can't actually prove anything. We can only fail to disprove things. And one of the things, I guess, that I was looking at all the time was the fact that animals have this flexibility, that there is no fixed diet that is what they require. It's no fixed set of nutrients. It's all a dance between what they're eating as real food and their physiology. And that flexibility is built in as an intricate, beyond complex set of checks and balances in the genome. And that's the way I looked at it. So that today, when we feed an animal raw foods, for example, it doesn't have to follow the set pattern of nutrients. It just has to follow the basic, or given the choice to the animals, as you say, of what they can select in terms of evolutionary food, but real food, not confected or fake food. How would you see that from your perspective? Do you see that as relevant to your work?
Yes, absolutely the case, Ian. I think of one of the things that's happened, and I don't mean this to be criticism. It's reflection. I reflect a lot. Historically, of course, animals would have been on rangelands, pastures and rangelands, and selecting their own diets. And one of the things that we've learned, if you really want to help animals, plant diversity of different forages, there's nothing better than that in terms of enabling animals to meet their needs. We know one of the things that struck me so much from our work is this notion that no two individuals are alike. We know that each human is so different. We could be identified by our fingerprint. Bloodhound could track us by our odors. There was a famous, I think, wonderful man, Roger Williams, doctor, who wrote a book, Biological Individuality, and he made such wonderful points of that. Well, we were seeing that over and over and over again. Anytime we would offer animals choices, you'd have this tremendous diversity of selection patterns, even if it was only two foods. Even if it's two foods, you'd see this continue. If you increase the number of foods, and to us, that was simply reflecting this individuality, and choice and ability to choose enabled individuality in these animals. So I'm heading in the direction you were talking. So, we ended up moving away from pasture finishing of animals and so forth to feedlots, to the feedlot system. And that's where, and again, I'm not trying to criticize. I don't want to, I have so many friends that have worked in all these areas. So it's just reflecting. But so we moved into formulating rations, very high grain rations, which ruminants don't eat high grain rations, right? We did studies that showed when we put animals on higher grain rations, it makes them sick, literally makes them sick. If we gave them antiemetic drugs that block the action of the emetic system, which allows us to experience nausea and so forth, if we gave them antiemetic drugs before we gave them high grain rations, they would eat more of those high grain rations. What's that telling you? You're blocking their ability to sense that illness. And so when they're in feedlots, they're doing this all the time, up and down. They eat, they get sick, then they go up and down. So, the feedlot rations are formulated to put a lot of weight on animals. We know that metabolically, They're not healthy when they're on those rations. We've been doing studies. I'm a cheerleader on these now, but where we're looking at meat that comes from animals that have been finished in feedlots versus meat that comes from animals that are out foraging on diverse arrays of different plant species. And when you look at the metabolomics, which is a way to look at metabolites, which gives you some idea of the diversity of different compounds that are entering into the body and into the meat and fat of the animal. There's such a rich array of phytochemicals, these phytochemicals that promote health in all animals, including us. There's such a rich array in animals that are out foraging, very little in animals that are in feedlots. But what's really interesting is the human nutritionist we work with that's doing some of the analysis says that when you look at the muscle tissue from animals that are coming from feedlots, it's like the tissue from people that are metabolically sick. When you look at the meat tissue from animals that are out foraging on rangelands, it looks like a healthy athlete. And you can think, you have diet and you have lifestyle, right? The animals out foraging on rangelands are walking around. They can move over the landscape. They're selecting diverse arrays of plants. The ones in the feedlot are can't move around much. They're on very high grain diets. That it's like a human on ultra processed foods, basically, huh? So where do you end up?
Can I stop you there, Fred?
Dogs as well. You could think that for dogs as well. I'm thinking of
that's where it's coming in, because today, and I've been writing about this for a long time, we are feeding our dog. We're not giving them food, we're giving them feed, because that whole AVCO thing, American Association of Feed Control Officials, is asking us to feed our cats and dogs as we would feed animals destined for a short life to be slaughtered. And I remember way back when I was studying agricultural science, there were papers written that showed that animals that were kept on those high carbohydrate diets for their, and I'm talking about feed animals, whether they're sheep or cattle or whatever, they too developed the same set of metabolic problems, diabetes, arthritis, cardiovascular disease, all those things, because they were kept on this same diet. And you mentioned this roller coaster. And so today we have a roller coaster where animals are fed this feedlot diet, which is dry dog food, basically. And they're fed that feedlot diet, which is almost exactly the same. And they have this roller coaster of having to have drugs to take them to suppress the problems that are being caused. So once they go off the drugs, then back on the diet, or they continue with the diet, then we have this return of illness. One other thing I think you mentioned from your research was that the long-term relationship between what is essentially a toxic food or poison that we're feeding to humans, and it's never linked to the cause. We feed this and it appears to be doing good. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think your theories or thoughts on humans in this area exactly parallel what's happening in the canine and feline world.
Yeah, so interesting to be visiting with both of you related to this topic. If you look at the ingredients on a dog food bag, you see just exactly what you're saying, right? It looks like a ration and I've had conversations with vets, and again, I don't mean to criticize. I think it's just a lack of understanding, of appreciation of where you've gone. But I've had conversations with vets and say, well, that's not a diet that they would have eaten evolutionarily. They would have been on. They wouldn't be eating high grain diets, right? They wouldn't do that. And I've had vets try to say, well, they've evolved to be different now and so forth. And then I shouldn't say that, but I remember one conversation I had with the person, and they were saying, well, that's where they need to have the grain. That's where they get their taurine. And it's like, no, the only place you get taurine is from meat. So I shouldn't even say that. You can cut that out if you want, but it reflects the fact that a lack of a lack of being exposed to that, right? You would hope that in a veterinary school that they would talk about these kinds of things and think about, okay, what is a diet that makes sense for our animals and to keep them healthy? We have a dog, Henry. He's a 4-year-old lab, and every time we take him into the vet, they just rave. He's so trim. He's so muscular. His coat is so shiny, and he is. And why is it? Because we're feeding him like you guys. We looked at the dog food, and we wouldn't have done this years ago. I mean, it's all evolution of our thinking, right? Yours and ours too. But now we look at that and we say, this makes no sense whatsoever. And so we're feeding much like you guys advocate. Absolutely the case. And it's fun to watch here. We had a dog called Chipita, and we weren't feeding her as well as we should have back in the day, this many years ago. But we grew this huge garden, and it used to be hilarious to watch Chipita. She'd go out there and she'd forage on raspberries. She'd grab an ear of corn. So she did. She was having some grain, okay? And she would grab cantaloupes, and it was just interesting to see their omnivorous tendencies as well, right? But this whole notion of meat and the importance of meat in their diets, and so thinking, as you've been saying, well, what kind of diets would the ancestors of our canines and so forth, what diets would they have eaten, and what kind of flexibility would they have shown in those diets, and using that as a basis, as you obviously have done over your career, to me just makes perfect sense. And that's where we've moved so much into, as we've gone along, the importance of plant diversity. In the health. I like to say that plants turn dirt into soil, and diverse mixtures of plants turn soil into homes, grocery stores, and pharmacies for all life below and above ground. And when it comes to the livestock, boy, we've certainly seen that as the case. Their ability to not only self-select to meet their individual needs for nutrients, but also to self-medicate when they get sick. That was another thing that we did so many studies on, and learned that they actually, we published a paper in Animal Behavior that was talking about 3 different illnesses and 3 different medicines. And what we were showing is that they learned to use different medicines from the medicine cabinet, so to speak. This isn't exactly what, but if they had a headache, they'd go for a Tylenol, let's say, a stomachache, Pepto-Bismol. We were working with different illnesses and different compounds, but that was the idea of it. And they figured out how to do that. Again, it was learned. And what we found too, and we didn't study this as much as we should have, we did a few studies. Mother can help to teach her offspring that as well. Think how interesting that becomes, huh? To be able to detect that the offspring is not well, and to be able to guide a little bit in terms of the food selection.